Western animated TV shows generally feature a strong sense of humor. While many modern Western animated TV series do have emotional sincerity, most Western cartoons are either outright comedies or are narrative-driven adventures that still have a very notable and heightened comedic component. Because in the West, animation is seen as needing to be lighter in tone, regardless of whether or not it's supposed to appeal to children or adult audiences. In other words, lots of animated shows are pigeonholed into a specific style of tonal storytelling. And admittedly, that isn't always a bad thing, mostly because animation can handle outlandishly creative ideas, yet still balance the importance of character development. After all, outright comedies like Lower Decks and Regular Show utilize animation in creative ways that just wouldn't be believable in live action. Because moopsie. Because baby ducks send them to the moon. And these shows do this all while having characters that you care about, which is important in any story, because obviously. And then when it comes to narrative-driven animated shows with heavy comedic elements like Infinity Train and Hazbin Hotel, these types of shows use animation in a way that is very humorous, yet does not overall detract from the deeper thematic storytelling at play. Because while yes, Infinity Train and Hazbin Hotel can be really funny, because depressed robot, because adorable snake that thinks he's a big bad villain, these shows also feature more emotionally mature storytelling about identity and redemption. If anything, these shows juggle tone perfectly. Yet with that said, these series unfortunately do conform to traditional animated genre conventions of featuring heavy comedic elements alongside their more serious themes and drama. As stated before, these animated series fit in with many other Western animated shows like a hand in a glove or a fascist at CPAC. These Western animated shows just fit in with a pre-established mold, meaning that there are minimal straight-up Western animated series with an emphasis on dramatic storytelling and a de-emphasis on comedy. And while sure, there have been more tonally serious Western cartoon shows in the past, I mean, there's a reason why Avatar: The Last Airbender, the original animated series and not the recent live-action show, and sure as shit, not the M. Night Shyamalan disaster that couldn't even say the main character's name right, is so damn beloved. And while yes, I understand that the original Avatar: The Last Airbender series had a sense of humor and was on Nickelodeon, thus needing to appeal to younger kids, Avatar: The Last Airbender was a narrative-driven action show way more so than it was a comedy, and it was a series that took the stakes of its own story and the emotional journeys of its characters with the utmost sincerity. I would just not classify it as a comedy or a show with that heavy of a comedic element. It was just a dramatic fantasy action show through and through, a style of show that is not and was not the norm. If anything, shows like Avatar: The Last Airbender are outliers, which hey, I can relate. Like in modernity, there just aren't that many narrative-driven action shows that can be enjoyed by both kids or adults, or even by just adults exclusively. Sure, many look back fondly on Clone Wars, Teen Titans, the original, and such, but there aren't that many action and or science fiction fantasy shows that replicate that style of storytelling or even push the envelope further in terms of detailed animation, resonant characters, and depthful, mature, and nuanced narrative development. And honestly, that's just a whiffed opportunity. It just feels like the potential for great modern Western animated storytelling is being missed here, which is unfortunate. This is why Arcane Season 1 was such a breath of fresh air when it released in 2021. Unlike many Western animated series that are either comedies or stories with heavy comedic elements, this animated fantasy show, based on characters in Riot Games' League of Legends video game series, as well as being produced by French animation studio Fortiche, is a gritty and narratively grounded fantasy action series with many dramatic elements. One that places a major emphasis on deep characterization, moral dilemmas, how the actions of some people don't match their political ideologies, mental illness, how lower class folks are harmed by political policies of the elite, how that said harm is often swept under the rug, and an overall conflict set in the fictional cities of Piltover and Zaun, two locales that are close to each other given that Zaun is an undercity in the canyons beneath Piltover. In fact, speaking of these settings, the show portrays Zaun, between its inhabitants, quality of life, and the gang wars, as being left behind by the high-life aristocrats in Piltover who are making great societal and economical advances due to experimentation into arcane magic, hence the show's title. And for all of these reasons, Arcane gives the viewer multiple justifications to care about its world and protagonists, because truly, there's just a really deep story here. There's just a higher emphasis on character-based drama and narrative development than compared to other Western animated shows, and that's what makes Arcane so damn interesting. The show uses animation to craft a compelling story about various characters like the musclehead and the literal embodiment of a woman who has lived the hard knock life in Vi, i.e. the brick shithouse of a woman who makes all the Sapphos swoon, the traumatized and not coping well Jinx, the lonely crime lord losing his edge Silco, the scientist Jason Victor, who innovatively and dangerously pushed the envelope when applying magic to science, the expert politician Mel, who plays her motives close to the vest, the seasoned and experienced 2-century-old Piltover council member in Heimerdinger, whose warnings about the need to practice caution and maybe even regulatory restraint to Piltover's progressing embracement of new sciences goes unheeded, the privileged Piltover noble-born Caitlyn, whose naive worldview is consistently challenged, and just so many other damn characters. And with that, Arcane is just an animated series with a lot going on in terms of drama and character development, and it is all just so damn riveting to watch. It is excellent. Unlike so many other Western animated series, Arcane is a very grounded experience. And while sure, there are humorous moments sprinkled throughout the season, because in a dark steampunk fantasy show, comedy relief be very important, Arcane is an animated, dramatic fantasy action show that cannot be confused with a comedy, differing from so many other Western animated fantasy action shows. It just goes against the norm, which I also can relate. If anything, Arcane just feels as fresh as Subway Nathan Drake, because for Western animation, Arcane just travels down a path that isn't traversed upon too much in our media landscape. It's a welcome deviation from the norm. And admittedly, there was a blueprint for success here, mostly in the form of Eastern animation, particularly Japanese anime. After all, anime features a lot more variety of style and tone than compared to Western animation. Sure, like Western television animation, there are outright comedies and narrative-driven shows with heavy comedic elements, because, you know, Japanese animation can get really f***ing ridiculous in the best ways. But still, in terms of Japanese animation, there is still a wealth of anime that are dramas, action shows, and other genres that Western animated shows generally don't touch upon. Sure, as stated before, these types of shows have and still do exist in the West, but unfortunately they are just nowhere near as prominent as they are in anime, especially when discussing more serious and grounded narrative-driven animated shows that skew towards adult audiences rather than young kids and teenagers. Because for whatever reason, Western animated TV series avoid genres with more serious subject matter, as if these other genres were Brussels sprouts infused with shingles, the worst combination of anything ever. If anything, Western animated television programming just generally avoids more serious, grounded shows, which is very much unlike the amount of variety on display in anime. Yet, it must be said that Arcane upended Western animated genre convention by being a gritty, character-based, dramatic action fantasy show with minimal comedic elements. Similar to more serious shows in the Japanese anime lexicon, Arcane proved that more genre variety is a welcome and good thing for the health of this very creative and expressive artistic medium. The series just displays that more is possible with Western animation. Additionally, Arcane Season 1 proves why animated, dramatic, action, fantasy, or science fiction shows can feature certain advantages over live-action fantasy and science fiction series. After all, live-action fantasy and science fiction shows have to contend with the fact that their action and special effects might not be believable or convincing compared to the dramatic character and narrative development in those said shows. Hell, even high-budget fantasy and science fiction live-action series can struggle with special effects. See The Wheel of Time Season 1 and Halo Season 1. In fact, let me use Halo as an example here. One, because like Arcane, it's also a video game adaptation, and secondly, it's just entertaining to poke fun at the Halo TV show, because that series blows ass chunks. See, Halo Season 1, even before marketing, had a Game of Thrones style budget of around $90 million, equating to about $10 million per episode, which is a lot for one TV show. I mean, let's be clear here, it's a shit ton of cash. So with all that money sunk into Halo Season 1, you'd expect the action and visual effects to be convincing, right? Well, long story short, it really wasn't. Because to be clear, the CGI action sequences with the various Alien Covenant baddies felt faker than the American dream itself. If anything, the bad effects were a notable flaw, and sure, Halo Season 1 had even bigger problems than subpar visual effects, i.e. there were lots of narrative developments that deviated from the games, lots of side characters and subplots that we just don't give a shit about, and there were weird out from left field developments, like when Master Chief had sex, because Spartan 117, he now. Unsheath that beef, Master Chief. But even with that out of the way, by just analyzing the visual effects by themselves, the bad CGI took me, the viewer, further out of the experience. Because with Halo Season 1, I just wasn't convinced that what I was seeing on screen was real. And that's a real f***ing problem given that, as stated before, Halo Season 1's production alone was $90 million. A lot of money was spent on this show, and the end product made it feel like it was all for naught. Because with that, we should have seen that tangible amount of money spent reflect on the final product, but unfortunately it didn't, because Halo Season 1 essentially flushed $90 million down the shitter. It was really bad. Now, Arcane Season 1, on the other hand, did not have this problem of non-believability. In fact, the series is also high budget, just like Halo Season 1, but where Halo Season 1 featured shitty action that ironically takes the viewer out of the action, Arcane's action sequences are inventive, believable, and fit in cohesively with the rest of the show's dramatic and character-based elements. Unlike Halo, or hell, even live-action shows like Game of Thrones where the effects are actually solid, there is never a question of believability in Arcane's action, because it's already fused and packaged with the overall art style for the show. If anything, every element in Arcane just is in sync with one another, and you can see the high budget of the production reflected on screen, proving that animated dramatic action, science fiction, and or fantasy shows can have certain advantages over live action ones. And while sure, there are disadvantages to high budget animation, notably that it can take a lot of effort and time, the quality of the production is unmistakable, meaning that with Arcane, you can really see the benefits of animation over live action. Furthermore, live-action adaptations of video game or other animated shows can have drawbacks compared to animated adaptations of video games or just animated source material in general, mostly because video games and cartoons can feature art styles that are difficult to capture in live action. In fact, sometimes the action on screen, the tones, and costuming just don't translate well to a live-action interface. Hell, live-action video game adaptations can especially fall prey to these problems, as seen with the recent trailer for Eli Roth's Borderlands movie, which looks kinda shit. Maybe fun, but in a shit way. While sure, I can't really judge the Borderlands film as a whole piece, given that it won't release until August of this year, 2024. The whole point of any trailer is to sell the movie to a given audience, and unfortunately with that context, the Borderlands trailer did not do shit for me, mostly because the Borderlands teaser tried to be as tonally cartoonish as the game's tone, i.e. a tone that is batshit bonkers, which is hard to capture with believability in live action, considering that live action is not a fucking cartoon or a video game. Obviously, it's a problem, and to make matters worse, the visual aesthetic and the costumes within the Borderlands trailer look kind of cheap and look like literal costumes, which yes, I know that the outfits shown in the trailer are technically costumes, because obviously, but you know, they are not supposed to look like costumes donned by actors cosplaying as the characters that they are supposed to portray. We are supposed to believe that these actors are the characters. We shouldn't view their clothing, wigs, and makeup as part of a costume, just extensions of the characters. And for all of these reasons, when it comes to the Borderlands live action movie, there already looks like to be a disconnect between the viewer and the movie, because this live action interpretation doesn't really capture the Borderlands games in a credible way. This is an issue that Arcane, an animated adaptation of the video game League of Legends, doesn't have, because as an animated show, Arcane's art style and its characters don't appear like cheap knockoff copies of what was in the game. Instead, you immediately get the impression that these characters belong in this show. In fact, Arcane's character models feel and befit the show's overall gothic art style with 100% accuracy, kind of like the one competent stormtrooper that actually graduated basic training, meaning that unlike the Borderlands movie trailer, I actually believed the story and the characters that Arcane was portraying to me. Ultimately, Arcane has proved that we need more Western animated dramatic action series. After all, Western cartoons are often seen in a comedic light or even as a medium for children, but those descriptors honestly do a disservice to this art form, because truly animated television shows are a beautiful and very expressive art form that can oftentimes be more believable than live action offerings and shouldn't be forced into just being comedies or narrative driven adventures with heavy comedic elements. If anything, this art form deserves stylistic variety, and that can clearly be seen in a more grounded steampunk fantasy drama like Arcane, a show featuring deep themes regarding social class, mental health, belonging, politicking, and such, with a very believable art style that never causes the viewer to question the authenticity of the story. Hell, with Arcane, everything is just on point. Even the theme song by Imagine Dragons works in this show. And that's saying something, because I really don't like Imagine Dragons, because when I listen to Imagine Dragons, I generally try to imagine a better band. And for that, Arcane's story, its action, and its visual art style are all in cohesive harmony with one another, because unlike many live action offerings, this show proves that animation can do things that live action shows otherwise can't do without encountering encountering some form of difficulty, because despite not featuring real physical actors, props, objects, or sets, Arcane's animation is far more convincing than this series would have been if it were in live action, proving that animated fantasy dramas and action shows have certain advantages over live action ones. And thus, to conclude, we need more grounded Western animated TV offerings. We need more series like Arcane. And thankfully, it kind of looks like we are starting to receive them, because there have been a few notable, grounded and mature Western animated series as of late. Some of the more notable of these series being the Castlevania show from the late 2010s, Masters of the Universe Revelation, which is a show that some folks on the internet hate about as much as I detest Anthem, but I honestly adore it, and last year's critically acclaimed Blue-Eye Samurai, all of which, including Arcane, are Netflix shows, meaning that more dramatic fantasy, science fiction, and action animated series are by all accounts arriving slowly but surely. And given that, I hope Netflix and other studios greenlight more projects like Arcane or Blue-Eye Samurai, because with these recent shows as examples, we can see what Western animation can be capable of beyond comedies, Disney shows and movies geared towards families, or narrative-driven adventures with heavy comedic underpinnings. And look, as stated earlier, a lot of these styles of Western animated offerings are great. Hell, some of my favorite shows are in these animation and tonal styles. I love you, Hazbin Hotel. But this doesn't change the fact that variety is always a healthy thing in any art form. If anything, variety can show that more can be possible with the tools given. And series like Arcane prove this, because through a show like Arcane, we can see a future for American and European animation studios working on long-form TV series geared toward adult audiences that are not just comedies. If anything, there is just so much potential here. I just hope that Western animation studios will be allowed to capture it.